Hey folks, Mark Levin here. Now, before we dive into today's episode, I want to talk about something truly valuable, protecting your financial future with gold. It's called diversification. Now, for that, I only trust Advantage Gold. They're the real deal with 5-star service and a sterling reputation. So give them a call today. Call Advantage Gold at 800-900-8000. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. Trust me, you'll thank yourself in the future. Now let's get to the show. Results may vary. Consult with your financial professional.
He's here. He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Merrick Garland.
The American people are entitled to know when a foreign power is attempting to exploit our country's free exchange of ideas in order to send around its own propaganda.
Yeah, no, that's true. You know, maybe we should know that about our own government as well, for that matter. That happened today. Attorney General Merrick Garland, as he outlined election interference. We're going to get into that. Very busy news day yet again. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. Mark will be back with us soon. And among the other things, we had the horrific shooting at a school in Winder, Georgia, where you had 2 teachers, 2 students that were left dead, a 14-year-old that was responsible. We're monitoring the developments there. Want to dive into the election interference and also illegal immigrants voting, because there are a couple things that are coming together here. One, what was outlined by the Department of Justice today. And secondly, what the mainstream news media has already begun running interference on. It's almost like they're working together. It's almost like one hand knows what the other one is doing between those two entities. So surprising. This thought came to mind. Accurate reporting by the mainstream media is rare. Yet it does occasionally happen. That's the thought that came to mind when I read the AP story entitled, "Illegal Voting by Non-Citizens is Rare, Yet Republicans are Making It a Major Issue This Election." I'm going to come back to that in a minute. Today, the Justice Department, in addressing the election integrity concerns and specifically threats against election workers, and this cycle's alleged Russian interference campaign, because, you know, we can't have a presidential election cycle that involves Donald Trump without having some type of a Russian interference campaign that just must be stopped. And also addressing the Iranian election interference campaign. Interesting dichotomy between those two. So anyway, AG Merrick Garland, he outlined several actions taken against individuals who threaten those who conduct elections across the country. Okay, that's good. Nobody should be threatening election workers. He also detailed a very specific Russian interference operation that the Department of Justice had broken up. This involved a lot of social media activity, multiple influencers, this outfit out in Nashville, 34 related websites. A whole big thing, all right? We got him. We got him. Okay. So the DOJ, government involved in taking care of all that. By the way, no word on which candidate or candidates or party were being targeted by this Russian interference. He then spoke of Iranian efforts to attempt to undermine Donald Trump's campaign. And as we came to know, following the assassination attempt on Trump, what had Iran been interested in doing? Oh, that's right. We found out after that it looks like they might have a hit out on Trump too. So given all that, I mean, you had all these actions taken against the Russian related interference, right? So, I mean, there had to be a whole lot with Iran because after all, I mean, Trump's life is being threatened by Iran, let alone his campaign. And so naturally there were no specific actions that were taken against Iran. I mean, that makes sense, right? Makes perfect sense. Something must be done to combat Russia, to combat their interference, but nothing from Iranian influence against Trump. Got it. Show of hands. How many people think the Biden-Harris administration has credibility pertaining to alleged Russian election interference? You feel really good about them being the arbiters of what's real, what isn't, and how to appropriately deal with these matters? I mean, it's not like 4 years ago, at right about this time, we were hearing from 51 intelligence officials that colluded with the Biden campaign to denounce Hunter Biden's laptop as, of course, being Russian disinformation, right? Not like that happened 4 years ago, right about now, right before the election, right? Didn't happen. Did not happen at all. And it wasn't like 8 years ago, right at this time, that the Trump-Russian collusion investigation and that narrative was underway. No, didn't happen. But hey, I'm sure that they are just being good, honest, decent brokers of truth and justice this time. Take you back to my first thought. And a lot of the distractions that I think are taking place right now with the foreign interference that is perhaps a lot more direct in elections. That accurate reporting by the MSM is rare, yet it does occasionally happen. So the AP story that I want to dive into a little bit here. The story entitled, "Illegal Voting by Non-Citizens is Rare, Yet Republicans Are Making It a Major Issue This Election." Curious, what do you think the definition of rare is? Okay? It's not a complicated question. We know what rare means in the context that it's used in the headline to the AP story. It doesn't happen much, right? I mean, the textbook definition is not occurring very often. Okay, not occurring very often. Now, let me ask you, if something has happened in every state that has investigated this issue, would you suggest it's something that's not occurring very often? If something has been evidenced to have happened in every election cycle for which it's been investigated, would you suggest that it's something not occurring very often? And if thousands of instances of an issue were discovered within just a few states that have looked into the matter, would you call that something that's not occurring very often? Yet the Associated Press does. In the AP story, they state this as their supporting evidence for the alleged rarity of illegal immigrants voting. They say Texas Governor Greg Abbott, a Republican, said this past week that more than 6,500 potential non-citizens have been removed from Texas voter rolls since 2021, including 1,930 with a voter history who have been referred for investigation to the Attorney General's office. Texas has almost 18 million registered voters. Oh, okay. Shoot then. Hey, that's totally cool, right? That's awesome. Or we take that to mean that it is just cool. And as long as you got many million registered voters, what's 1,930 illegal immigrants voting? What's over 6,500 that could have participated in this year's presidential election in Texas? As long as you got a lot of voters there, who cares? See, that's what apparently makes it rare. That's the definition of rare to the AP. Thousands of people can do it as long as there are just millions that are also doing it. Illegally, of course, with the millions, but you know. The AP also cited this out of Ohio. Is that Ohio Secretary of State Frank LaRose, a Republican, said in August that he referred for potential prosecution 138 apparent non-citizens found to have voted in a recent election, and 459 more who registered but did not vote. Those figures were higher than reviews from previous years, but a small fraction of the more than 8 million registered voters in Ohio. Well, again, it's totally cool if hundreds of illegal immigrants are able to vote in Ohio, as long as, again, it's only a small fraction of the registered voter population. That's the important thing here. The third example used was Alabama, where the AP offered this up. They said the Alabama Secretary of State, Wes Allen, a Republican, because you know what that means, recently announced that 3,251 people previously identified as non-citizens by the federal government are being switched to inactive status on the state's voter registration rolls. They will be required to provide proof of citizenship and fill out a form to vote in November. Alabama has more than 3 million registered voters. So again, where's the issue with 3,200 potential illegal immigrant voters in Alabama among friends, right? Who cares? Rare. Now, here's what's especially telling. These are three examples cited by the AP in three diligent red states. Okay? This is the important point. This is the what's the other hand doing here kind of thing. Is there, exactly. They do try to get you to buy the idea that in these three diligent red states that are obviously minding the store when it comes to their voter rolls, even then you come up with over 10,200 illegal immigrants on voter rolls. But they try to make it seem like, well, that's just what happens everywhere. Or is that what happens even when you have three really diligent red states that are careful in reviewing their voter rolls and mind the store on this stuff? So that introduces the bigger point, the bigger question still. As though we're just supposed to say it's cool they can have over 10,200 illegal immigrants voting in these three states. What's happening in, say, the other states, the maybe not so diligent states? What's happening maybe in traditional blue states and key swing states with Democrat governors? Anybody wonder what may be going on there? Yeah, we're going to take a closer look at this, dive into the rest of the story. As one once said, I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mudd Levin.
The cracks in our economy are widening by the day. We've got a labor market that's cooling faster than expected. Unemployment jumped to the highest since the end of 2021. The market could be in free fall any day as investors panic over a potential recession. Now, some bank stocks are getting hammered as fears of a downturn grow. Even the Fed is talking about rate cuts to prop things up. In uncertain times like these, you need a solid plan for your wealth. That's where gold comes in. It's been the ultimate safe haven for as long as we've used money. And when it comes to gold, I trust Advantage Gold. They're a top-rated American gold company and can help you protect your hard-earned money. Call Advantage Gold now at 800-900-8000 for a free gold investment kit and to see if you qualify for $1,000 in free silver. Don't wait. Call 800-900-8000 today. That's 800-900-8000. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. That's 800-900-8000. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
Multiple law enforcement sources tell Fox News that 18-year-old Haitian migrant Akeem Mark Desire was arrested by police in Mansfield last week. That's about 45 minutes south of Boston for allegedly molesting a 10-year-old boy who lives near him. Now, we're told he first flew in the U.S. last June as part of the Biden administration's mass parole program for Haitians, and he's now charged with indecent assault and battery on a child under age 14. Now, this is actually the second time this has happened in recent months. In March, another Haitian national who flew into the U.S. via this Biden parole program program last June, Corey Alvarez was charged with aggravated child rape after prosecutors say he raped a girl inside of a migrant hotel outside of Boston.
Yeah, because, that's what is acceptable these days, right? I mean, we're supposed to be importing illegal immigrants that you pay for that then, carry out their business like that. And by the way, was he a registered voter? I think that's important too. We need to make sure that they have access to everything that this country has to offer. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. And so my radar went up today. We heard the Department of Justice was going to be holding a presser on election integrity. And that always is of interest to me. And we get into the presser. And what do we find out? Well, they're going to be prosecuting, the DOJ is, some people that threaten some election workers. Okay. Of course, we have Donald Trump running for president, and we're only a couple of months away from the election. And so we've got to have a Russian conspiracy, Russian interference. So that unveiled itself today. And what we don't have is an issue with illegal immigrants and election integrity actually within our voter rolls in states. In fact, the AP ran a story saying that it's very rare. Thought that was awfully interesting. So in diving into this, in the AP story, they picked 3 diligent red states that clean their voter rolls and stay on top of this stuff. What they found is that 10,200 illegal immigrants were still on the rolls, even in 3 diligent red states. But what do you think then is going to be happening in states that are not so diligent, states that say like leaving dead people on their voter rolls, states that might even, to a certain extent, encourage those who lack legal status in this country to register? I mean, of course, it's against the law to vote in the federal election, but, so many different government services here. You see, here's the voter registration form. We're going to hand that to you along with all the other paperwork. You think it might be fair to say that if there are thousands and over 10,000 illegal immigrants found on voter rolls in 3 diligent red states, 3 meticulous red states, that there might be just a few more illegal immigrants that could be found in the states that are not so meticulous? What's also really offensive is this. Would you say that 537 votes out of nearly 6 million cast would be considered rare? I mean, by the AP standard, that would be, right? 537 votes, you have 6 million people. Oh, right. That was the margin of victory for George W. Bush in Florida in 2000. 537 votes. But, 10,200, not a big deal. Arizona in 2020, Biden carried the state by fewer than 10,500 votes. But, what's the big deal with over 10,000 illegal immigrants on voter rolls in a few states? Same election, he carried Georgia by 11,700 votes. But again, not a big deal, right? Got a lot more on this. We have a lot to get to the bottom of. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin.
This is Mark Levin with an urgent message. We are living in grave and dark economic times that are going to get worse. We just saw an abysmal jobs report while unemployment shot up to the highest level since the end of 2021. Meanwhile, the stock market looks like a gamble. Many banks are getting crushed as recession fears mount. The S&P Banks Index fell 2.4% in a single day. That's a lot. Regional banks fell nearly 3%. That's even more. These are bad signs. Even the Fed is talking about rate cuts. You need to protect your wealth. That's where diversification and gold comes in. It's been a bedrock of wealth preservation for centuries. And the best company I know of is Advantage Gold. Their experts can help you protect your savings from economic chaos. Call now, 800-900-8000 for a free gold investment kit and see if you qualify for $1,000 in free silver. That's 800-900-8000. Don't wait. Call now. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
Mark Levin, radio's principal patriot. Call in now at 877-381-3811.
We know that Russia is not the only foreign power seeking to interfere in our elections. As the U.S. intelligence community noted 2 weeks ago, we have observed increasingly aggressive Iranian activity during this election cycle. That includes recently reported activities by Iran to compromise former President Trump's campaign.
Yeah, I mean, and even accounts that apparently Iran is trying to take out Donald Trump, not just his campaign, but like him. And yet, Attorney General Merrick Garland, who announced, I mean, we took down this whole huge, Russian interference operation in the United States. What was the announced action in response to Iran? Nothing. Not a thing. Isn't that interesting? That's some dichotomy in response between the Russian and the Iranian interference. Is that also a tell about which party, which candidate might have been disadvantaged in their view by the Russian interference as opposed to the Iranian? And just inquiring minds want to know. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin as we are talking about the election integrity presser held by the DOJ today, some of the actions, but also the impact of illegal immigration and what some states have found recently, some of the reporting on it as well, and what we needed it to be mindful of as we are now only 62 days away from Election Day. You can catch me, by the way, socially at Brian Mudd Radio, pretty much everywhere. I am the host of the Brian Mudd Show, my home station, WJNO in West Palm Beach. You can catch the Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcast. Always an honor and a pleasure to be here with you. Okay, so one of the things I've been breaking down, the AP's running of interference for the left in trying to illustrate how rare it is that illegal immigrants are ending up on voter rolls, how rare it is that they are voting in elections. Except that even their example was pretty illustrative of just how much impropriety is possible in diligent states, where in 3 diligent red states, there are over 10,200 illegal immigrants. States that are careful about who ends up on voter rolls and that are reconciling them. So you wonder what happens in states where they're not being reconciled at a minimum. The AP in their story, they pointed out that it is illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. This is always the big argument used by the left. Well, there's a law against that. Yeah, no, you're right. It absolutely is illegal for non-citizens to vote in federal elections. Guess what else it is? It also happens to be illegal for illegal immigrants to be here in the first place. This just in. How well would you say, having had unenforced immigration laws, how has that gone? Would you say that having over 3.5 years worth of unenforced immigration laws is really serving this country well? How many of the warm and fluffy migrants, I like calling them the warm and fluffies, the border crossers, or those that are just outright flown in by the administration these days at our expense? And we make sure they're all nice and comfortable because, they're warm and fluffy. These are not people that wish anything other than to be highly productive members of society. All right, this is what we're always told. They just want a better life. They just here to be contributors. We're also told that they commit less crime than you and me. Biggest lie running. And I'll have more on that again here in a moment. I've talked quite a bit about it, but so a lot of it bears repeating. So how often do you think that illegal immigrants have gotten to the southern border, realize that they're about to break the law? And by the way, that also includes almost all of the asylum seekers too, because that is the other big lie, is that asylum seekers are legitimate asylum seekers. They are not. Almost every asylum seeker is nothing more than a scam artist that is an illegal immigrant that is trying to use the asylum process for something that it is not intended to be. 97% of asylum seekers have no legitimate claim to asylum. They're nothing more than illegal immigrants trying to scam the system. But how many of all of them get to the southern border and go, golly gee, You know, what I'm about to do would be breaking the law, so I'm not going to do it. Then they turn back. How often does that happen? Well, I mean, with even by the government's own accounting, over 10 million people having crossed into this country since Joe Biden and Kamala Harris took over. What is that? Probably not a lot of them that are doing that, right? Probably not what happens. So what then is the expectation that the people whose first action in this country is to break the law suddenly feel like they're beholden to them? And this is why, along with the record number of illegal immigrants allowed to run free in this country, that we've seen non-citizens committing crimes at a rate that is 914% higher than legal citizens. One of the huge lies that's been out there for a very long time is that, no, they are much less likely to commit crimes than the average American is. Which, by the way, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, if the premise of anything is false, anything built on that false premise is too. If somebody is actually here illegally, they're already an offender. How could you have a federal offender that is less likely to commit a crime than you? I mean, it already by definition is incorrect. But what we have seen under the Biden administration, and maybe it was true once upon a time that there were some sects of people who had come into this country illegally in the past that really were just trying to make some money, send it back home, and be done with it. But under the Biden administration, it's been a lot different. They are committing crimes at a rate that is 914% higher than legal citizens. So what do you think as it pertains to impropriety around elections that might look like? Think they might be more likely to also, I don't know, illegally participate? The reason why illegal immigrants are now responsible for approximately a quarter of about all federal crimes is because of that enormous increase we've seen with the open border under the Biden-Harris administration. Illegal immigrants are now responsible for 24% of all drug trafficking. I mean, these are the things that just drive me nuts. If you want to get rid, who doesn't want to get rid of about a quarter of all drug trafficking? You want a quarter of it to go? Get rid of the illegal immigrants. Shut the freaking border. Property crimes. How many people would like to get rid of a quarter of all property crime? Get rid of the illegal freaking immigrants, and you get rid of a quarter, 25% of all property crimes. That's how much is being committed by them. Do you like being a victim of fraud? We can get rid of 28% of all fraud that's taking place if we just get rid of the illegal immigrants. How about homicides? Those are always good, right? There's like some good homicides. Oh, probably not what we like in society. They have increased. Non-citizen homicides have increased by 967% under the Biden administration. That's fun. Oh, and there's also been a 604% increase in non-citizen robberies, burglaries, theft, and fraud. Greater than sixfold. Non-citizen thefts, frauds, burglaries, but of course not voter fraud. No chance. No, I mean, we've seen an explosion of every other kind of crime. Everything. But man, no, when it comes to our elections, they draw the line, right? I mean, they might kill people, but they're not going to. Not going to engage in voter fraud. They really do think you're just stupid. So here's the deal. Every state should have a mandatory process in place to ensure that only citizens are registered to vote in federal elections. Recent years, you've had Alabama, Colorado, Florida, Ohio, North Dakota that have passed constitutional amendments specifying that only, that word only, citizens can vote in those states. You have Iowa, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Wisconsin that have proposed amendments on their ballots this cycle that would also mandate that only citizens would be able to vote. I mean, those should pass. And measures should be taken up in all other states, too, that specify that only citizens should vote as well. But even then, what does that require? It still requires willing state administrators who are going to enforce the law. They're going to do the right thing by properly reconciling voter rolls and making sure that illegals aren't getting registered to vote. But another measure that should be passed, and this has not gained much attention, it's in the U.S. House. It's called the SAVE Act. The act would mandate proof of citizenship in order for voter registration. Absolutely should happen. And as the Heritage Foundation's voter fraud database depicts, since 1979, you've had 1,546 proven instances of voter fraud. And again, that doesn't mean only 1,546 illegal voters. No, we had more than that in just the 3 state examples that we took a look at that the AP even, acknowledged in their report. Now, that is the proven instances. These are things that have gone all the way through the system, have led to, court decisions, and often involve many votes for each of those instances. 215 of those have happened just since 2020. We're always told that, not much to see there when it comes to illegal voting, voter fraud. We've had 215 of the proven instances of voter fraud since 2020. We've had 1,313 criminal convictions of voter fraud. You've actually had numerous election results. They are often local races that have been overturned due to voter fraud. Those don't make attention, getting attention outside of those communities. But who really cares, right? Because we're told that it's rare. AP told us it's rare. Garland held an election integrity thing today, and the government told us what the issues were, and this wasn't identified as being one of them. What's rare is intellectual honesty these days. What's rare is accurate reporting from most news outlets. Election integrity and specifically transparency into it really shouldn't be a controversial issue. Really shouldn't be a partisan issue. And actually, among voters, it isn't. Among the partisan hacks, it is. Among the Marxist leftists in government, it is. And their allies in the godless, soulless, and slanderous news media. But actually, just rank and file Americans know it is not a partisan issue. And it certainly shouldn't be an issue that an honest and unbiased news media establishment should be attempting to bury. But that election integrity continues to be one of those things, tells you just how important it is that we have adequate poll watchers everywhere. This has been a theme we've been talking about for a long time. We have to control what we can control. We got to have poll watchers everywhere. The left, their allies in the godless, souls, and slanderous news media will tell you they care about counting every vote. They just happen to not care about your vote. In the sense that it doesn't need to be properly counted because the votes of illegals are allowed to count as least as much as yours, right? Places where they're voting. Let's go to Chuck in Boston. Chuck, welcome to the show.
How you doing? Thank you for taking
good.
my call. Listen, I'm concerned that if Kamala Harris wins the election, keeps the border open, and when they run out of money, the United States is going to turn into purgatory. So we have one of two choices. We can either get Donald Trump back in office, or you could pick the devil's advocate. She is an evil person that is going to destroy this country if we let her. We have to stop her at all costs. Thank you.
Yeah, look, this election, in terms of the implications, is that big of a deal. This is the one where, you don't make it back. And it's in large part because of what we're talking about here, the overwhelming of the system, the breaking down systematically of things. When you talk about tens of millions of illegal immigrants, people getting onto voter rolls, people that are getting IDs that have no lawful business even being in this country. The amount of money that is being spent that is unaffordable at the local level, certainly at the federal level as well. Yeah, we are talking about rolls for radicals becoming reality. This is the long-term plan that is now right in front of us. And so we have a choice as a country. Now, Well, I'll tell you, and I'll talk about this later in the show, is I'm optimistic that the tide is turning. So we will be getting into that. Be right back. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
The cracks in our economy are widening by the day. We've got a labor market that's cooling faster than expected. Unemployment jumped to the highest since the end of 2021. The market could be in free fall any day as investors panic over a potential recession. Now, some bank stocks are getting hammered as fears of a downturn grow. Even the Fed is talking about rate cuts to prop things up. In uncertain times like these, you need a solid plan for your wealth. That's where gold comes in. It's been the ultimate safe haven for as long as we've used money. And when it comes to gold, I trust Advantage Gold. They're a top-rated American gold company and can help you protect your hard-earned money. Call Advantage Gold now at 800-900-8000 for a free gold investment kit and to see if you qualify for $1,000 in free silver. Don't wait. Call 800-900-8000 today. That's 800-900-8000. Tell them Mark Levin sent you. That's 800-900-8000. Performance may vary. You should always consult your financial and tax professional.
The content was pitched as legitimate independent news when, in fact, much of it was created in Russia by RT employees who work for the Russian government.
Yeah, so Merrick Garland, man, by God, they got to the bottom of this election cycle's Russian interference campaign. So, 2016, it was the Trump-Russia collusion. In 2020, we had the Hunter Biden laptop as Russian disinformation. Remember, that's what we were being told. And now our elections are safe because Garland and his team, they're on it. They broke up whatever this thing they were talking about was. 34 websites that are down. A couple people, this outfit in Nashville that was involved with social media influence. All is well and good in our elections because the DOJ is on top of this thing. There is so much that is confounding. There's a lot that's frustrating. There are some actions that have been taken. One of the things we talked a lot about regarding election integrity coming out of the 2020 election, states doing something differently. And a lot of states have. There are actually 28 states that have passed new voting laws since the 2020 elections. Now, not all of them have been great, but some of them, a couple important swing states have improved their election systems, like Arizona and Georgia, for example. The other side, our score in terms of election integrity, not so great. Talk a little bit more about that. And also, we're going to talk about turning the tide politically. I'm Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark.
This segment of the podcast is exclusively sponsored by Pure Talk. Pure Talk offers great coverage and can save your family money on your wireless bill every single month. Go to puretalk.com to find the plan that's right for you. Thank you again for listening, and thank you so much for this sponsorship, Pure Talk.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Mark Levin.
We allege that as part of that effort, RT and its employees, including the defendants, implemented a nearly $10 million scheme to fund and direct a Tennessee-based company to publish and disseminate content deemed favorable to the Russian government.
Yeah, Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, and Garland is on the job. I mean, nothing to worry about with election integrity this cycle because, by God, Donald Trump's running for president, and they've managed to thwart another Russian interference campaign. I know that you feel as though everything is well in hand now because there's simply no possible way that a government that in 2016 was investigating an alleged Russian collusion plot with Donald Trump, one that led to him being surveilled as a candidate, one that led to him being surveilled as president of the United States, one that led to a special prosecutor, one that led to years with the false reporting. Nothing to be concerned about at all when Donald Trump's involved in an election and you hear that we have, as the government, gotten involved in taking care of a Russian interference campaign. Sound like in 2020, you had this Hunter Biden laptop. But don't worry, because we've got 51 intelligence folks that say that it's Russian disinformation. We've got that thing, and we made sure that all the social media companies, all media companies just did not allow that information about the Hunter Biden laptop to be shared, because after all, it's going to be Russian disinformation, right? So yeah, nothing to see here. As Merrick Garland, in the Department of Justice, they have held their election integrity press conference. They've told us that they stopped this whole big Russian election interference operation, while also telling us, and yeah, by the way, Iran, which we told you recently is out to kill Donald Trump, they're still doing a lot of things. They're being very aggressive, more than we've seen before, while not actually announcing any actions that were being taken against Iran. And yes, they also ended up cracking down on some folks that were threatening election workers. Something interesting that did not come up, making sure that we actually have legal, voters. And while they didn't address the issue at all of the role of election integrity from a voter registration standpoint, from the record number of illegal immigrants that have come into this country, you did have the Associated Press that has been running interference, suggesting that it's a very rare event, except that even in their own presentation of information in 3 states that are meticulous, there were over 10,000 illegal immigrants on voter rolls, thousands of which had actually already voted. So there's that. But as I mentioned before the end of the first hour, there have been a total of 28 states that have taken some action on election integrity since 2020. There have been some meaningful moves in states like Arizona and Georgia that are among those that had results that were questioned 4 years ago. That's good. In fact, if you take a look at these states, of the 28 states that have done something involving election law, the Biden states, Arizona, Georgia, New Hampshire, New Jersey, New Mexico, and New York. Now, you take a look at a state like New York, and would that be passing election integrity the way that, say, a conservative would want to go about it? Absolutely not. So not all of these laws are created equal. And that takes me to the first kind of obvious point here. When it came to election integrity measures, there have been a lot of states that took it very seriously, like in Arizona, in Georgia, and Florida, for example. At the same time, you have had a number of states that it really just may have, in some respects, made it even easier, especially at the local level, for people who lack legal status to get on voter rolls. This has been a big concern that in many places, when you have the onboarding of a lot of these asylum seekers or outright illegal immigrants, they're actually being handed papers that have voter registration forms attached with them. Now, still, they're not supposed to register if they're not supposed to register. But then again, if they're not supposed to be here, then what are they doing here in the first place? And why should we expect them to adhere to the laws? Now, in terms of the vulnerabilities, one of the things that I've tracked from cycle to cycle, year to year, because they put it out annually around the world, you have Harvard that has their electoral integrity project. Now, we are the United States of America. We are the world's leading superpower. So what do you think our national score is? If you take a look at the average of how election integrity is doled out across the country on a scale up to 100, what do you think our national score is? Survey says this year we are a 71. We are a 71. We're effectively running C quality elections, or set to run C quality elections this year, and low C quality elections on average. So for perspective, in the Americas alone, these are the countries with greater electoral integrity scores than the United States. Again, according to Harvard's study this year, Canada, which leads the way in the Americas with an 86. You have Uruguay, because why shouldn't they be holding more credible elections than the United States, right? I mean, Chile is doing a better job. Costa Rica, known for their election integrity, right? And yet they're ahead of us. Peru and Brazil. Yes, Brazil is actually ahead of us. Brazil, that is known for corruption. Brazil, that right now is censoring X. This is what ranks ahead of us. That's special, right? So, yeah, obviously, there is an awful lot that we still need to be mindful of, one. And two, all the more reason why we need to make sure that we really are doing things differently this time around. I mean, the first thing is, without COVID, you're not going to have all the excuses to throw out state laws and just mail out ballots everywhere and usurp state laws in the name of the pandemic. But you're still seeing room for impropriety here. Again, the average election is being run at a low sea level. Having well-trained poll watchers, having people that are minding the store, this is important. All these things we've been talking about. I'll keep my eye on it. Now, mention that I am feeling a bit more optimistic about things. There are a lot of different pieces of information out there as we're taking a look at this post-Labor Day time horizon that I think present an opportunity for some greater perspective on how this election is starting to shape up. And I do think we're having a tide that is shifting, a turning political tide, and also I think an increasing indication about who the more unifying candidate is going to be. And a lot of it does come down to policy. You know, one of the things, as you have seen, Kamala Harris, that's been out on the campaign trail, she's out there again today, just kind of throwing things against the wall. She was talking about her small business economics plan where we're going to increase the tax deduction for small businesses. Okay, we're going to raise your tax. This is what she's not saying. We're going to raise taxes on you because we want the Trump tax cuts to expire. So we're going to raise your taxes. But then if you can actually start a small business and if you can make any money in that small business, we'll raise the deduction for you. Okay, well, that's great. But anyway, you had all the talk of good vibes. You had all the unity talk, right? That was the big thing at the beginning of her campaign, all the way through the DNC. And it was clear that her campaign strategy was just to ride that straight into election season, which begins this week. And just hoping that voters would be stupid enough to buy it all, right? Well, what is increasingly clear as she is by the day just making up random policy promises, throwing stuff against the wall, hoping people that buy into it, is that she is realizing that her A plan isn't going to work. They just don't put any specifics out there, don't put any policy ideas out there, and just it's not working anymore. So if you take a look at Harris's 4-year voting record in the United States Senate, talked about this, I believe the last time I was guesting for Mark. The senator that Kamala Harris most closely aligned with during that time, her 4 years in the Senate aligned precisely with Trump's time as president. During that era, her voting record was identical to Bernie Sanders. There was only 0.3% difference in the voting between Bernie and Kamala. So the real Kamala Harris, when she stands up, is in fact the burn in a different package. So if you are attempting to try to infer the ideological shift this country might see if Kamala Harris were to become president, yeah, I mean, the burn is your comp. And that is part of the reason why Trump was talking that way out of the gate. Now, how many people take a look at Bernie Sanders and go, you know what that guy is a unifying candidate? And that is exactly what Kamala's voting record suggests she is. All right. So as we are now working through this, she realizes, okay, well, I can't just put out the good vibes. Apparently all of the free abortions and vasectomies outside the DNC, that didn't do the trick here. Apparently I'm not going to be able to just skip all interviews. So I'll go ahead and do the canned CNN interview with her emotional support animal, as Scott Jennings put it. Still not doing any press conferences, though, but I've got to come up with some of these policy positions. So steal some of Trump's. We'll do the no tax and tips thing. And and here's this small business. It's obvious that she knows that she can't expose who she really is. So she's out there flailing right now. And the bottom line is, I don't think it'll work. And I think we're already seeing signs that it's not working. You know, I have a saying that you can lie to people about what policies will do. And those who are inclined to believe you will, but you can't lie to people about what is or isn't in their wallet because they know. And this has become the theme of the Kamala Harris campaign, right? It has been, her new theme is a new way forward, which oddly ignores that she's the current vice president of the United States. She'll say that we can't go back, referring to Trump. But this is where I think people are really starting to come back around to now as she is saying that. She keeps reminding people about what things were like when Trump was president. And the question then becomes, would you like to go back? Would the average American like to go back to when inflation averaged 1.3%, while wage growth averaged 4.7%? Those are the averages during the Trump years. Would the average American like to go back to paying, say, $2.30 for a gallon of gas? Would the average American like to go back to having access to a sub 3% mortgage rate, perhaps? Would the average American like to go back to having an enforced southern border where any illegal border crossers were deported, those seeking asylum were made to remain in Mexico until they had a hearing? Would the average American like to go back to having, say, 30% less crime? And I have no doubt, none whatsoever, that the average non-Marxist wacko American would like to go back to the way things were when Donald Trump was president in a heartbeat. And the average person is not going, you know what we really need is Bernie Sanders. And what this is actually doing is presenting the true unifying candidate. Because Donald Trump's message is the unifying message. No, his rhetoric may not always be so unifying, but his policies are unifying. Pick up there next. I'm Brian Mudd, in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
I'm going to let you in on a little wireless trick that can cut your cell phone bill in half every single month. Other major carriers want you to believe you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. Here's the fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you'll ever need and you'll ever use. Pure Talk, my cell phone company, only charges you for data you actually want. Listen to this. For $25 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data plus mobile hotspot. Do you know what you can do with 5 gigs of data? You can browse the internet for 135 hours, stream 1,000 songs, or watch 10 hours of video. Folks, stop overpaying for wireless. Get 5G coverage with Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/Levin. Switching is painless. It's easy. There's no contract, no activation fee. You can even keep your phone and your number. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin, puretalk.com/Levin, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month on top of all the other savings when you sign up with Pure Talk.
The American people can rest assured that the men and women of the federal government are at this very moment laboring to prevent future abuses and interference in our electoral process. But this cannot alone be the work of government. Every citizen bears a hand. We urge all Americans to read through the indictment today, study the sanctions and the designations that we announced.
I mean, there you go. I mean, rest assured. John Kirby is on it. The Biden administration is on it. Merrick Garland's on it. The Department of Justice, they are on it. They have this thing. If there is any impropriety that is out there that could possibly interfere with our elections, by God, they are doing everything they can to make sure that there are no issues there. Unless, of course, it's allowing a completely open border and actually, flying people into this country as well. So we can get as many illegal immigrants in here as possible. See how many of them might end up on some bitter rolls and then have, like the Associated Press write stories and say, oh, it's not really a big deal. It's rare that you have illegal immigrants. But I mean, other than that, we're really on top of election integrity and things like that. Always a question about what the other hand is doing. And importantly, what's really going on in states that are not minding the store with election integrity. It's been part of my message as we are into the final 62 days now before Election Day and really election season. We'll talk about that more coming up here in the third hour. But election season, that starts this week with ballots that are going to be going out. The first ballots of this general election cycle, they're going out on Friday. Now, alongside all this, I've also been talking about how I think the tide is turning in this election. Harris rode all the momentum early on, all the good vibes and the unity that was present there in the convention, until she got out of the convention and realized that voters aren't really buying this. Only the people that want to buy it are buying it. And so, crap, now I've got to do something. And the timing was brilliant, in so many different ways. If you think back to the Republican convention, you had the Biden announcement and the ascension of Harris that kind of took the air out of the Republicans' balloon, right? All that momentum coming out of the convention, and then Joe's gone, they anoint Kamala, and suddenly that's all the rage. Well, RFK dropping out was not the same as Biden dropping out, obviously, but the timing of it on that Friday after the DNC had concluded, and in a lot of ways, is a turning point that I think you can now start taking a look at. And it also ended up undermining the message of the unity. Kamala Harris is supposed to be the unity candidate. So she was so unifying that a lifelong Democrat from the most popular Democrat family in American history, who started this presidential cycle in a Democrat primary, joined forces for Trump, and also pointed out that it wasn't a fait accompli, that he had reached out to Kamala Harris and tried to talk to her in her campaign, and she didn't even want to talk to him. So that made it pretty easy. Not very unifying of Harris not to even talk to RFK Jr., was it? And so then you start taking a look at the unifying candidate, the unifying message here. Probably not what Gavin Newsom offered up either. Remember, around the DNC, he was asked, it was in a podcast, the Pod Save America podcast, about the whole process and what he thought. Obviously, he didn't necessarily think that the whole situation was all that unifying with Harris and her candidacy. His quote is pretty funny. He said, "We went through a very open process, very inclusive process. It was a bottom-up 30-minute convention between tweets and other tweets." I mean, he said it's amazing how unified everyone is. I mean, it's next level. At least that's what I've been told to say. And so that kind of brings up the broader point. I thought that Gavin Newsom moment really articulated well what all this has been, and that now is all unraveling. And that is that it's all been faked. The whole thing's been faked. The enthusiasm, the alleged unification, the momentum. That's what Democrats, in conjunction with their allies and the godless souls and slanderous news media, had been told to say. That the enthusiasm was behind her, that the momentum was behind her, that she's a unifier, that there was still something resembling a democratic process in the selection of the Democrats' presidential nominee. It was all faked. But the more that she's talking about her new way forward, people are thinking, man, things were pretty good when Trump was president. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
I'm going to let you in on a little wireless trick that can cut your cell phone bill in half every single month. Other major carriers want you to believe you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. Here's the fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you'll ever need and you'll ever use. Pure Talk, my cell phone company, only charges you for data you actually want. Listen to this. For $25 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data plus mobile hotspot. Do you know what you can do with 5 gigs of data? You can browse the internet for 135 hours, stream 1,000 songs, or watch 10 hours of video. Folks, stop overpaying for wireless. Get 5G coverage with Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/Levin. Switching is painless. It's easy. There's no contract, no activation fee. You can even keep your phone and your number. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin, puretalk.com/Levin, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month on top of all the other savings when you sign up with Pure Talk.
This is Liberty's 911 hotline. The Mark Levin Show. Call him now at 877-381-3811.
This is the lie at the heart of Kamala Harris's campaign, that if you elect her, she's somehow going to be different than she already has been in office, where her policies have caused higher grocery prices, higher food prices, and, of course, a wide open southern border.
Bingo! A politician, a senator who had a nearly identical voting record to Bernie Sanders, only 0.3% distance in the voting record with Bernie Sanders. That's who Kamala Harris is. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. I'm the host of The Brian Mudd Show, my home station, WJNO, out of West Palm Beach. You can catch The Brian Mudd Show podcast wherever you get your podcasts. At Brian Mudd Radio socially, it is always truly an honor and a pleasure being here with you and talking about the turning political tide and how Trump is actually looking more and more like he is the unifying candidate. And on that note, kind of set up how the good vibes and the strategy that Team Harris seem to have had with the whole DNC and how they're just going to ride no policy positions and good vibes straight into the election season, tried to avoid the press, the media, everything else, and just hope that was going to work. Well, we are now seeing evidence that Harris has probably peaked and that Donald Trump is well positioned to win. I always like starting with these kinds of questions here. You know, do you know who you want to vote for? I mean, is there any question as to who you're going to vote for? Is there any chance that anything happens between now and November or whenever it is that you might cast your vote? Is anything going to change that vote? And by the way, that goes for you and just about every voter. The fact of the matter is that where we are politically as a country today is pretty much where this country is likely to stay by the time that you have votes that are counted on Election Day and far too many places after it. And I'm not just saying that because we're getting down to crunch time. We're getting down to where we're 62 days now away from Election Day. Just a couple months away. But I'm saying it based upon history. If you take a look at the historical polling, and most specifically the previous two presidential election cycles, it suggests that where we stand as a country today is going to be pretty darn close to where we are and what the polls are going to say in Election Day. Whether the polls are right or wrong, they're probably not going to change a whole heck of a lot. Now, you probably have heard over the years that most voters who don't really engage in politics a whole heck of a lot, they typically get there around Labor Day, right? Well, it actually is true. If you go back to 2016, in the Real Clear Politics average of polls, Hillary Clinton was shown with a 3.9% advantage in the national popular vote. All right, so this day in 2016, Hillary plus 3.9. On Election Day 2016, the RCP average had her at 3.2. All right, so that was it. And only a move of 0.7% between where we sit in Election Day going back 8 years ago. In 2020, even more exaggerated, this whole example. There was absolutely no difference. No difference. On this date, 4 years ago, Biden was shown with a 7.2% advantage nationally in the polls. That was identical to the polling average on Election Day. All right, so what does that mean? Well, probably means that Kamala Harris has peaked in the polls, because that's what we have seen with Trump's two challengers previously at this stage of the cycle. They peaked. And it's also because the current polls have reflected pretty much everything that you might imagine would be inherently good for Kamala as well. The DNC, which, by the way, I mean, the grand scheme of her not being positioned well and her campaign starting to show signs of nervousness about this, with her throwing all these, random policy positions out there that aren't believable. Her bounce from the DNC was the smallest in modern DNC history. If you take a look at the average bounce that a Democrat gets coming out of their convention, it's been 2 points. If you take a look at the Real Clear Politics point average, Harris got 0.3% out of it. 0.3. That's it. And so that Kamala didn't get more juice out of the DNC shows that her ability to grow her support at this point probably tapped out. What's more is that following Kamala's first canned interview with CNN last week, which, I mean, weak, I think is a good way to describe it as well. There's nothing of if not a pretty weak performance for. As Bill Maher mocked, it's always interesting. Here you have this leftist icon, and even Maher mocked her for not only her performance, but having what he called her emotional support VP there as well. The biggest takeaway that my wife and I gleaned from that interview was that the rumors that Harris has been hitting the sauce pretty hard might be true. Might be true that Kamala has been hitting the sauce pretty hard. I mean, there are some things there. It's interesting. Biggest takeaway from that interview. Anyway, there's only one known potential catalyst left on the calendar that could definitively serve to meaningfully move the race. That is next Tuesday's debate. By the way, you got the asterisk around September 18th, which as of now is still the date that Trump is to be sentenced in the New York state criminal case. You got Pandora's box that could play out there. But, I mean, even if you had Mershon that goes for it, does that really serve Harris's purpose? Or, I mean, all the lawfare we've seen to date has benefited Trump. You also had Alvin Bragg, the prosecutor, who probably picking up on that political point, most recently said, yeah, I'm fine with the Trump team's request of moving the sentencing until after the election. So, I mean, if even the prosecution saying, yeah, go ahead and punt this thing, Mershon, I'm do not know what's going to happen there. But at this point, I would be surprised if we did end up getting Mershon going out on the skinny branches on his own and saying, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to stick it to Trump right now. I'm going to put him in jail or whatever else. And if he did, I have little doubt, but that it would ultimately backfire. So I throw that out there as the whole asterisk in this conversation. But the known political catalyst, the one that is left out there, where you go, all right, how could Kamala really change public opinion of her? Okay, so next Tuesday's debate. Now, on that note, who really thinks that the presidential candidate who in 2 presidential races still hasn't won anything at the ballot box with actual voters, still hasn't held a press conference since becoming the presumptive Democrat Party nominee, who couldn't even stick the landing on a CNN interview with the help of her emotional support VP or animal, whichever you prefer, and who was eviscerated on the debate stage the last time she was on one by Tulsi Gabbard. Now, is she really ready to take Donald Trump on and win the day next Tuesday? I mean, that's, you take a look at this, and you do have Tulsi Gabbard, which, to Trump's credit, smart to bring Tulsi into the mix. He has enlisted her for debate prep. She has warned recently against underestimating Kamala Harris on the debate stage. Always good to, take that approach when you're heading into these things. But, I mean, history says that we kind of know who she is, what she's about, and everything else. So, I mean, short of a full-fledged assist by ABC moderators in this thing, hard to see how she's going to hit one out of the park. Nevertheless, I found this to be, fascinating in a way that had to do a double take. Word was from the Harris debate prep team to NBC News, quoting this top source, that the debate prep team is wanting to remind people of what it was like during Donald Trump's years. Seriously. NBC News is reporting this unnamed source, but top source. The strategy is going to be to remind people of what it was like during Donald Trump's years. I mean, seriously? Seriously. I mean, the whole idea of what she's been doing out there in the campaign trail, and they were doing this during the convention as well, talking about, how evil Trump is and everything else, and we can't go back. And, Kamala Harris is pretending that she's not really a sitting vice president by saying that she is a new way forward. That's what she represents. I would be thrilled if the Harris strategy in Tuesday's debate is to remind people of what it was like during Donald Trump's years. In fact, my only complaint about Trump during the Biden debate. And look, I mean, obviously it didn't matter because all Trump had to do was basically have a pulse and he had been in good shape there. But the one complaint I had about Trump was that he never borrowed the Reagan line. He never just went there and asked voters if they were better off than they were 4 years ago. So, shoot, if Kamala Harris's strategy is to help him with that, remind voters about how things were, it really gives you an idea if there's any truth to this, which based upon a lot of what she said on the campaign trail, based upon her slogan and everything else, suggests it is. They really are so delusional with TDS that they think things were bad. They think the average American thinks it was bad under the Trump presidency. They really don't get it. So if Kamala Harris' strategy is going to be to help Trump, help voters remind them of what it was like when Trump was president, if that is the play, I mean, Trump might just want to yield his time to Harris, just let her make the case for him, just kind of sit back and let it happen. But, yeah, so back to where I started with the historical comparison within the polls. Biden was shown on this date and on Election Day, 7.2% advantage, and he barely won. Clinton was shown with a 3.9% advantage nationally, and Trump won. Kamala Harris's lead right now at just 1.8% nationally means that Trump is running over 5 points ahead of where he was 4 years ago and over 2 points ahead of where he was when he won. That is how and why Trump is well positioned to win. Be right back. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
I'm going to let you in on a little wireless trick that can cut your cell phone bill in half every single month. Other major carriers want you to believe you need unlimited data so they can overcharge you. Here's the fact. Most of you are buying way more data than you'll ever need and you'll ever use. Pure Talk, my cell phone company, only charges you for data you actually want. Listen to this. For $25 a month, you can get unlimited talk, text, and 5 gigs of data plus mobile hotspot. Do you know what you can do with 5 gigs of data? You can browse the internet for 135 hours, stream 1,000 songs, or watch 10 hours of video. Folks, stop overpaying for wireless. Get 5G coverage with Pure Talk. Go to puretalk.com/Levin. That's puretalk.com/LEVIN. Switching is painless. It's easy. There's no contract, no activation fee. You can even keep your phone and your number. Again, that's puretalk.com/Levin, puretalk.com/LEVIN, and you'll save an additional 50% off your first month on top of all the other savings when you sign up with Pure Talk.
If Kamala Harris thinks these policies are going to do a lot of good, and of course most of them are nonsensical, but if she thinks they're going to do a lot of good, she should try them out now because she's currently in power, not promise to do something when she's in office in the future that she's not doing when she's in the office in the present.
Yeah, you think a little wisdom there from J.D. Vance as she is pretending that she's not the incumbent vice president of the United States. It's a fascinating thing. She's a new way forward, except that she's the current vice president of the United States. I mean, she really does think that you are that dumb. She really does think the average voter is that dumb. Meanwhile, Donald Trump is the best positioned he's been on this date, the point where even casual voters are getting engaged, that he's been in any of his 3 presidential campaigns. When you consider the possibility, if not the likelihood, that Harris has also peaked based upon the relief boost she got from Democrats after Biden dropped out, the massive assists that she received from her allies and the godless souls and slanderous news media who commonly covered her as like the second coming for over a month. Most recently, the benefit of the DNC. There is reason for Trump's team and his supporters to feel optimistic about where this race can finish in 62 days. But the key is to, in fact, finish this race stronger than the prior 2 elections as well. I mean, yes, that means a strong debate performance by Trump next week. Also means Trump supporters voting early and in much larger numbers than ever before. And means concerned citizens serving as poll watchers, more of them than ever before. It means having the RNC across the country preemptively ready for any potential election anomalies or shenanigans. It means treating this election as though our future and the future of our country depends on it, because it does. Trump will make America great again, but he's only going to make it happen if everyone does their part between now and whenever voters are finally going to have their votes counted sometime on or after, in far too many places, Election Day. Let's go to Chris, trucker in New Mexico. Chris, welcome to the show.
Hey, thank you. Real quick, just had a couple of things. I grew up here in New Mexico all my life, and this is a liberal blue state, as I'm sure you know. And they've been giving driver's license to illegals for years. We got to get a little gold star on our driver's licenses. They call it a real ID, so we can actually, apply for a passport and things like that. Another thing, I see these guys out here all day long out here on the road. All kinds of foreign nationals. Chinese, Indian nationals, Mexicans, and I confront them. I ask them, where y'all from?
Well, Chris, appreciate you being there. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Keep on trucking. Keep on questioning as well. Be safe out there while you're doing it. Keep fighting the good fight. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
He's here. Now, broadcasting from the underground command post, deep in the bowels of a hidden bunker, somewhere under the brick and steel of a nondescript building, we've once again made contact with our leader, Merrick Garland.
Alexa, why should I vote for Donald Trump?
I cannot provide content that promotes a specific political party or a specific candidate.
Alexa, why should I vote for Kamala Harris?
While there are many reasons to vote for Kamala Harris, the most significant may be that she is a woman of color who has overcome numerous obstacles to become a leader in her field.
And so much more. It actually kept going. It was reeling off the reasons why Alexa would vote for Kamala Harris. It was a glitch. The important thing for you to know, Amazon has been clear about, it was a glitch. What are you going to... Computers, cyber stuff, it happens. Right? What happens is that the glitch, the people that happen to program these things, and then lie to you like you're stupid, right? We always happen to see these glitches moving in one particular direction. Right? When was the last time you had a glitch that was in favor of Donald Trump with anything that had to do with technology, any content that was online? Always seems to be one way. I'm sure it's a coincidence. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. And yeah, as nonsense like that is happening, and as Amazon thinks you're stupid enough that you'll accept the explanation that it's a glitch, it's been fixed, must be election season. And it very much is. Election season starts this week, which also, I guess, another indication was that, hey, today we have the Department of Justice, Merrick Garland, and the big team of election integrity upholders that really got to the bottom of this cycle's Russian interference operation. The same way that they so nobly and bravely and expertly navigated the Trump-Russia collusion situation in 2016, the same way that they were so deft in thwarting the Hunter Biden Russian disinformation in 2020, along with the 51 intelligence officials that should have been tried for election interference themselves. Oh, by the way, Garland wants to ring some of these Russians up on election interference. How about charging every one of those 51 liars, those 51 election interference operatives, those 51 people who are every bit as bad as whatever it is that you theoretically took down today? Anti-American pieces of poo. How about that? But Yes, this time around it was much different. They did the whole big thing. They took down a bunch of websites. They took down, some social media influencers, and they got it. They also told us that, yes, Iran still is out to get Trump, but they didn't do anything about Iran. Then, so election season starts this week. And it is a season these days. It is not a day, unless you're in New Hampshire. In New Hampshire, it is still a day. New Hampshire, you still have one day. You show up on election day, you go vote. But everywhere else, it's a season. And a little trivia for you. What percentage of voters now vote prior to election day? What do you think? What percentage of voters now vote prior to election day? What number you come up with? What do you think? 30, 50%? If you said 71%, you'd be right. So in the 2020 presidential election, only 29% of people voted on election day. And that includes all the folks in New Hampshire that had to vote on election day. So that breaks out to 30% who opted for early in-person voting, 41% who used vote-by-mail ballots. Now, because of the pandemic 4 years ago, wouldn't be surprised to see a little bit of shifting in those numbers, a little bit swinging back in favor of, say, more in-person voting and a little bit less mail-in voting. But there's one trend that I have studied when it comes to elections that has never changed. That is, once voters have voted early, whatever the method is, they haven't gone back. We've literally never had an election cycle where you had more people that went back to voting on election day. So people tend to like this. So we can expect upwards 70% of the voting is going to happen before election day. And by the way, I have long been one of these people myself. You go back to one of the first elections I was able to vote in. I was working that day, and I was on the other side of town from my polling place. Almost didn't make it back to vote. I was like within 10 minutes of missing it, and then I had to get back to work. So it was a whole big thing just to get there, to get my vote done, get back to work. So yeah, I've always voted early in person, every opportunity. But also as early as possible, too. Talk more about that here in a moment. So anyway, what this means during this abbreviated Labor Day week, as we are ushering in the fall season, this is now election season because vote-by-mail ballots are going to be on the move this Friday. Starting in North Carolina on Friday, you will have the first ballots out for this general election cycle. By the 16th, early in-person voting will be underway in the pivotal state of Pennsylvania. So here you have two swing states, the first that are going. North Carolina Friday, Pennsylvania the 16th. And one of the big changes this time around has been the Trump team's approach to election season. So gone has been the messaging of waiting to vote on election day. In its place has been the Trump team's message of the importance to swamp the vote. They first announced this in early June. So 8 years ago, the future president of the United States ran a campaign on draining the swamp. This cycle, the former and God willing future president of the United States launched the campaign to swamp the vote. And it doesn't have anything specifically to do with swamp creatures voting. It does have everything to do with voting early. And it is, without a doubt, talking about all the policy nonsense with Kamala Harris, reversals. She's just throwing things against the wall and hoping stuff sticks. There is one policy reversal that Donald Trump has made since first entering politics. And it is, without a doubt, critical to his opportunity to win. And that is his launching a campaign encouraging his voters to get out and vote early. So during the launching of the Swamp the Vote initiative, he said this. He said, Republicans must win, and we must use every appropriate tool available to beat the Democrats. Whether you vote early, absentee, by mail, or in person, we must swamp the radical Democrats with massive turnout. If we swamp them, they can't cheat. It just doesn't work out. That is bigly you might say. And what we've already seen from Trump, and I mentioned it at the time, it was really critical that he didn't just say it, throw it out there, and then walk away from it. He needed to get his butt out there and do it himself. And he did. In Florida's August primaries, you had the former president, the first lady, they both got out and they voted early. They did early in-person voting. And this is super, super important for Trump if he's going to win. And for that matter, Republicans down ballot as well. Because as I've highlighted in prior conversations that have been related to this one, you got to play the game the way that it's played. One of the examples that I used in describing the difference here, if you take a look at the 2022 midterm elections, where the country is largely disappointed, the conservatives were not performing the way that they were expected to perform, except for one place, and that was in Florida. What was so different about Florida? I mean, yeah, you had a popular governor in DeSantis, and that did matter, no doubt about it. But there was one thing that you could point to that was different than the rest of the country. Nowhere else in the country did Republicans vote early in the margins that they did in Florida. Democrats used to hold an advantage in early and vote by mail ballots in Florida. Republicans outvoted Democrats 2-1 prior to Election Day in the 2022 midterms. And that's what resulted in Republicans having the single best election they have had in Florida's history. That was the difference in Republicans winning elections in Florida and doing something that had never been done, by margins that had never been done in the state. And so if you employ that strategy, if you put that to work everywhere, if Republicans get their butts out and they vote everywhere, like they have most recently in Florida, you're going to see different results. It would have, no doubt, made the difference between outright losses and wins in many other states 2 years ago. And one of the things that's been important for a long time, and I talked about election integrity to start the show, and I think it is really important that we do everything we can to mind the store, be aware of potential impropriety, but also to stop complaining. Right? I've said for a long time, Republicans need to stop complaining about the way that elections are conducted across the country, and you got to play the voting game the way that it's set to be played. That's what Democrats have excelled at for a long time. You know, Republicans complained about mail-in ballots being everywhere rather than using them everywhere they were being sent around 4 years ago. Republicans made cases that, oh, man, look how long early voting is going on in a lot of these different places. Well, how about getting out there and voting early, taking advantage of that opportunity? So, again, when you take a look at that Florida model, when Republicans in Florida stopped complaining and just took advantage of it all, used that model, it turned into record results. And so that is what needs to happen. There's no substitute for good policy, good candidates, good policy positions. None of that matters. Republicans across the country pretend that elections only happen on Election Day, because they don't. It's time to play the game the way that it's played. And the message is so incredibly important for another reason. It was really instructive, an analysis that was put out by Dick Morse around the 2020 election, taking a look at what can happen based upon early voting and vote by mail patterns. And as Dick pointed out, it accomplishes two things. It ensures that you don't have that oh crap moment on Election Day where you just can't get out there and vote, but it accomplishes something that's even further off of the radar of pretty much everybody that is not a party operative. And I'll pick up there next. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
Unions in Detroit using one tone of voice.
Is this something that
same
you think...
line?
Okay, Peter.
That she used the same line in Pittsburgh, and it sounded like she at least had some kind of a southern drawl.
I mean, do you hear the question that you're... I mean, do you think Americans seriously think that this is an important question?
Yeah, actually. Yeah, the exchange between Peter Doocy and Karine Jean-Pierre yesterday, the White House press conference, actually, and for this reason, everything that the Kamala Harris campaign has been about has been smoke and mirrors. It's all been faked. The enthusiasm, it was faked. The whole ascension process, it was faked. All of this enthusiasm manufactured, right? So now you have a flailing Kamala Harris going around, throwing new policy positions against the wall every day, hoping something sticks. So yes, I think a lot of people actually would like to know what she stands for. I think some people would like to know if she's authentic or if she really is the kind of person that just goes from one crowd to another and then tries to pander to them by using fake accents. I think there's a lot of insight about who a person is based upon the way that they would talk to a particular audience. So in that context, yeah, I do think there are Americans that care about the kind of thing. Do we want a fake poser as a president? Or do we want and do we need a real leader as president? Now, Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin, and before the break, I was talking about the importance of engaging election season as it is now upon us. The first ballots that are going out, North Carolina on Friday, important swing state there. You got the early voting starts in Pennsylvania on the 16th, and the impact it can make when you do get out and vote early. So in one of the most insightful pieces of analysis I have seen, you go back to around the 2020 election, and Dick Morris produced information showing that the engagement by voters early is worth up to 5% of the vote. And how? Because you do have a small percentage of voters where they get to election day, they're like, I'm going to vote in person election day, and then life happens. I mean, it could be crazy things. You get stuck at work, you get in a car accident, no telling, stuff happens. And there's a small percentage never gets there. But there's something else that is off the radar of pretty much everybody that isn't a party operative. And that is the resources that can be expended elsewhere. You have the parties that are always working to get out the vote, right? And if you have been around an election and you are getting hit up with texts or maybe calls and all the mailers and everything else, hey, get out to vote. Here are the early voting locations. You can request about all this stuff. That's time. That's money that is being spent to try to turn you out. And that is time, and that is money, and that is effort that could be spent turning out somebody who isn't you, somebody who might be a less reliable voter than you. So actually what happens is if you get out and vote, and you actually vote as early as you can, you'll probably notice that, hey, you're not getting hit up by all these different entities trying to get you out to vote because they figured out that you have voted. And then because of those resources being deployed elsewhere, along with the people who make sure they vote rather than getting to Election Day in camp, Dick Morris identified that it's worth up to 5% of the vote, up to 5%. So you amplify the impact of your vote by getting out there and playing the election game the way that it's played, by getting out there and voting basically about as early as you can. How many super important elections have been decided by 5% or less? If Trump were to get anywhere close to 5% more of the vote 4 years ago, he would have won going away. Wouldn't have been particularly close. So one of the many things that you can do, one of the many things that we can all do, it's not just to get out there and vote, but to get out there and vote, however our state allows it, as early as possible. Unless, of course, you're in New Hampshire, in which case, you're doing it on Election Day. And if you're in a situation where you're doing a vote by mail ballot, track it. Now, not everywhere has appropriate tracking mechanisms, so make sure of that. I would always do early in person if you are in a place where you can't specifically track your ballot. But if you are, you can do the mail thing, track it that way, make sure it gets through. These are a couple of the really important dynamics that can go an awful long way to ensuring that Donald Trump is the next president of the United States and that Republicans down ballot win and we control Congress heading into next year. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.
When the going gets tough, and tough get Mark Levin. Call him now at 877-381-3811.
New York Governor Kathy Hochul answered questions about this, confirming that she did speak to the FBI as part of the investigation and called this a betrayal of her trust after her former deputy chief of staff, Linda Sun, was arrested. She's now free on a $1.5 million conditional bond today. She pleaded not guilty to charges that she acted as a foreign agent of the Chinese Communist Party. Sun is also charged with visa fraud, alien smuggling, and money laundering conspiracy. Her husband, Christopher Hu, is accused of helping launder millions of dollars in paybacks from the Chinese government.
Yeah, that's fun, isn't it? That is Fox's Nate Foy on the report. Brian Mudd in for Mark Levin. By the way, host of the Brian Mudd Show. You can get my podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can check me out socially at Brian Mudd Radio. Always great to connect with you, and always a pleasure getting to guest host for Mark Levin, spend some time with you. Isn't it fascinating how it always seems to be Democrats that are somehow or another duped by the Chinese Communist government? Isn't it fun that Kathy Hochul, governor of New York, had an aide, a top aide, who was actually a Chinese Communist government operative, working to influence communism in New York's government? I would say they've been pretty successful. I would say it's been a good run up to this point. China probably got what they were looking for out of this one. And it just leads you to wonder, okay, well, what does the decision-making process look like? Is this oversight? Is this intentional? Things that make you go, right? Speaking of China, let's go to Ron in Salem, Oregon. Ron, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Brian. I've served 35 years ago in the Navy when I had Tiananmen Square, and I watched on 7 screens what happened at the time period. The Chinese, you never hear from Obama administration or even the current. But you know what's funny? We can let TikTok run, manipulate our kids, manipulate our politicians, and yet they want to use Russia, Iran, anything to take the narrative off. Even when they got a base in Cuba, where the Russians used to have a base and have listening devices from Cuba. They're in Canada with troops doing troop exercises the last 5 years, and they're in Mexico. What's the common denomination of all that? It's a way to control. It's a way to take the heat off because they know the love of money is appealing to the Jezebel that we got that's running. And to make my example on that situation, I had a cousin over 36 years ago, arrested from the same lady when she was the DA in the Daly City of San Francisco area. And yet the invaders are chopping heads off in my state, human trafficking, children trafficking, buying up our farmland, 200,000 acres, the largest holder of land mass is by China, and with the national security issues with our allies like the Philippines and Vietnam. How much more can we take?
Naran, it's a great call. Thank you for your service. And you're right on point, which is, in the grand scheme of this election being a point of no return, I'm optimistic. I hopefully shared some information that has left you feeling optimistic about where we sit in this election, as Donald Trump is far better positioned than he has been in either of the prior 2 elections, running over 5 points ahead of where he was at the same time in 2020, running over 2 points ahead of where he was when he won the election in 2016. as the bloom has come off of the hype rose of Kamala Harris now. You'll hear about like relief rallies in the stock market. If you have a lot of selling that takes place, you kind of had that with Kamala Harris in the polls after Joe was out. Yet a lot of people are just so happy he was gone. And now people have figured out, okay, well, there's really nothing there. And she really is the person that we thought she was before. I mean, she was one thing that people often forget about Kamala these days, or is conveniently left out by the godless souls and slanderous news media, is that her favorability rating, her approval rating, was actually lower than Joe Biden's up until the point where she was anointed to be the successor. In fact, here's something that's kind of interesting on that note. How many states, for all the Kamala Harris adulation, how many states do you think she has a positive favorability rating in? What do you number would that be? I mean, surely with the poll numbers being the way, it's got to be a lot, right? And it's 17. 17 only 17 states that Kamala Harris has a positive favorability rating. By the way, only one of those happens to be a swing state, and that's Wisconsin. So 1% positive favorability right there right now, but only 17. So what's actually happened, even with a lot of the polling, and by the way, she's pretty consistently performed better in the national polls than she has in swing state polls. A lot of this is her running up the score in places like California, her home state, and in New York, big blue states, where she has double-digit favorability ratings, positive favorability ratings. And most of the rest of the country going, not feeling it. In fact, Trump, never known for his likability, right? He is favored in 19 states. A couple more states that prefer him in terms of being a favorable person than Harris. So anyway, one of many things. Now, to the point, you're expressing about, the point of foreign affairs and the issues that we have. You take a look at how far down this line we have already gone to where, following the collapse of Afghanistan, you have Russia that invades Ukraine. You have Little Rocket Man who becomes Little Rocket Man once again. You have China that then provocates over Taiwan. The Philippines is constantly harassing other countries, obviously is infiltrating our politics. They were not afraid to run the spy balloons across our country because they knew they had nothing to worry about with Joe Biden as president and Kamala Harris as vice president of the United States. We saw what Hamas was willing to do to Israel on October 7th. You see the escalation of all these conflicts around the world. And then you put together the pieces that were put together in the call with a lot of these things, which is you hear about, okay, so there's this Chinese spy that was working for Kathy Hochul, working for New York's governor. All right, well, China is not just China. China is a bad enough actor on their own, but China is Russia. China is Iran. China is Little Rocket Man in North Korea. China is Cuba. China is Venezuela. China is Nicaragua. You have all these bad actors that are working together. And what do you think happens if they get another opportunity, a weakness? Probably the only thing that's actually holding the world together to the extent that it is right now with the ongoing wars that are taking place, as big of a mess as it is out there, is the threat to the bad actors that Donald Trump really might come in January and be president of the United States again. If that wasn't the backdrop, if that wasn't part of the calculation right now, all bets are off. There's absolutely no telling what might be going on or what we would be in store for. And with all of the bad actors that have been acting especially badly lately, yeah, I mean, if we ended up getting her, the conversations about World War III, not far removed. There's a lot of reality to those kinds of threats. Let's go to Dave in Arizona. Dave, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, sir. So,
Thank you.
State 48, volunteer for the Trump campaign in 2020, PCs here in Arizona, and also a member of Trump Force 47. I wouldn't get too disillusioned with us winning this state, and I'll tell you why, because the Republicans were in charge in 21 and 22 with the governor, the state House, and the state Senate, and didn't really change any of the election laws. I know there's lots of publicity now about the recent lawsuits, but unfortunately, when Clinton signed the 93 motor voter law, all the social services and all the driver's licenses that are applied for by the illegal invaders that come across the border, I don't believe they'll be able to be scrubbed out of the registrations. We've got a registration problem in America, and especially here in Arizona, not really a vote problem.
Well, to your point as well, you also have a Democrat governor now, and what is the willingness to enforce even the existing law or to try to make sure that there is not impropriety in the election process? So I hear your concern. You know, one of the things to take a look at just to kind of gauge how far has the needle been moved in a particular place. You have the Heritage Foundation. They have their own election integrity scorecard, and Arizona right now ranks 24th. You're ranked 24th in election integrity, which, given that the overall country's rating, according to Harvard, is a 71, doesn't necessarily say much. It says that you're basically like a C in terms of election integrity. Take a look at a state like Georgia that really moved the needle when they passed election integrity laws. They got all the way up to second. Georgia now second in election integrity in the country. So, no, I hear your point. I mean, you're obviously on the ground. You've been engaged in these kinds of things, and God bless you for it. What do people need to do in your state? What would be helpful to you and the others that are working to try to make sure that Trump wins, but also there's integrity in this process? What could they do to help you?
Well, we're going to continue chasing the vote with, like the organization that Charlie Kirk is running, TP Action, continue to register more people that are rock-ribbed solid conservatives. But we're doing something here on the 21st, later on this month. We're going to go start scrubbing the voter rolls because we've got people, our Arizona canvass after the Maricopa County audit proved that we have a lot of people that are on the rolls that have moved, that are now convicted felons, that were born in 1900. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff. There's instances of 86 people that are registered to the same address, which is an abandoned lot. It's been abandoned for 2 decades. So we're gonna do what we can to get those voter rolls cleaned up, much like the Judicial Watch projects that they've been running Tom Fitton for a couple decades. And we'll just petition the Secretary of State. Again, another liberal. So how much action can we get when we push on the string? Who knows? But at least we make the effort, right?
Yeah, sure enough. I mean, it's a fight worth fighting. Dave, appreciate you being there. Best wishes to you and the state of Arizona. Let's go to Sandra in New Jersey. Sandra, welcome to the show.
Hello?
Yes, you're on. Welcome to the show.
Oh, hi, Brian. Thank you for taking my call.
You bet.
I was thinking about this. I'm a mother, and I do not feel that Kamala really cares about women's rights. And let me just say really quick why. I have a child, let's just say, which I do, and let's say something goes wrong a little bit along the way. And in most families, things happen. It's not unusual. I want to know what's going on. She doesn't want me to know. She wants to be in charge. Let's say there's a problem with the sexual identity. She wants to be in charge. She doesn't want me to know, and she wants to take care of the problem herself. Now, as far as abortion goes, I'd rather deal with one day of unpleasantry if I have to go to another state. Let's say my state doesn't do it, so I'll go to another state and deal with it one day. But that's one day of sadness versus the rest of my life sad because they screwed up my kid or they didn't let me get involved to maybe try and help my child. Whichever way it goes, I have a right. So she really doesn't care about women's rights because this is an example, right?
No, no doubt. It's politics above all else. Appreciate the call, Sandra. Brian Mudd in for the great one.
Mark Levin.
The irony right now is that the DNC, which has been trying to keep me off the ballot, is now suing to keep me on the ballot.
Yeah, isn't that cute, right? So you kind of saw that one coming. RFK saying, look, I don't want to be on in any of these swing states. And now you have Democrats that are suing to try to keep RFK Jr. on in those particular states. So disingenuous. It's kind of funny. You also have, in that same kind of thought as RFK Jr., of course, came over to join Team Trump, you have increasing members of the Walz family that are now coming out in favor of Trump. First, it was his brother Jeff who got out on social media on Facebook over the weekend. It was like, hey, I am 100% against what he stands for politically. And once that thing kind of blew up, he didn't expect it to go viral the way it did. He said now that he's gonna start laying low. He doesn't want to get involved too much. But yeah, he's definitely not with his brother politically. But you have the extended Walz family, many members that have now created these shirts that are the Walzes for Trump. And so increasing numbers of the emotional support animal or emotional support VP, whichever reference you prefer, that are now making the move towards Trump. Look, we're getting down to crunch time here. We're 62 days away from Election Day. It is time to get out there and swamp the vote. Ballots heading out on Friday. Good news is Trump's the best positioned he's been in any of these three presidential elections. The bad news is, obviously, the downside is something that we can't allow to happen. So do your part. Get out there and vote. Talk to you soon. Brian Mudd in for the great one, Mark Levin.